Today I want to talk a little bit about implicit bias and stereotyping, because this is all about how we see and interact with people in ways that we are not often aware of or in control of. And I want to describe a little bit about how that happens and sort of why it happens, because it's inherent in human interactions, and then also a little bit about how we can do a better job of noticing it and hopefully finding ways to improve upon it. So, why do we stereotype? Well, the idea of a stereotype is that it is a picture in our heads about what something is. For the most part, the human brain very much does not see and then define. We like to place things into a definition or a category or a grouping first, and then figure out the visual details of whatever it is. Now, this actually played a really important role in human evolution because our brains need to move quick. They very much need to know if something is dangerous or not dangerous before we can actually figure out an impression of whatever it is. And that's an important factor. So if I see something sort of rustling in the bushes, I don't want to have to take the time to say, okay, which part do I see? Do I see the right colors? Do I see the right pieces? I need very quick cues to help me decide if it is something dangerous and I should run, or something friendly and I should go towards it. So categorization is a huge part of biology, evolution, and how our brains work. There's a lot of evidence of this. So it's really a very universal function. It allows us to organize and manage stimuli that is constantly bombarding us. So my picture here is a lunchroom. When you walk into a lunchroom, no matter where that lunchroom is, whether it's been a place you've gone for a while or somewhere new, you have to make a lot of very quick decisions, typically related to where to sit. And a lot of times, those decisions have to be, like, you can't just stand around, so you're looking. You are scanning for anything that looks familiar, so you start with familiarity. You might scan for something that is sort of familiar if it's not somebody you know or not. You might scan for areas in a particular spot. So everybody does this a little bit differently. Some people look for a wall, some people look for a middle, some people look for a particular type of seat. But it is related to how your brain needs to find something, and you need to do it quickly and efficiently, so we rely on patterns and not necessarily all of the data, because if I had to take in all of that data, I definitely would never figure out where I was going to sit down, and then I would never eat. So we have evidence that categorization begins when we're children, that we like to put things in clusters and make them similar and be like, oh, these things are all the same, and these things are all the same. And even small children, 2-year-olds, were noted to mostly play with things that were categorized. Like if you pick up one car or vehicle, you'll pick up a car and then a little truck and then a little boat and play with all of those together before switching over and saying, well, now I'm going to play with these different animals. You'll pick up the pig and then switch to the dolphin and kind of play with things all together. I know that sometimes we maintain those things through adulthood. I very much also like to do a lot of all of one thing at a time before switching gears to another one. So then we relate categorization, which is something, again, our brains do anyway, with the social conditioning of the world that's around us. So you might have heard of conditioning before. It's where we make an association with something. Classical conditioning was done by Pavlov, and it's that idea that if he took a dog and put the dog near a piece of food, the dog would salivate like, that meat's real good. And so what he started doing was ringing a bell every time the food was near. And if you do that enough different times, your brain, or in this case the dog's brain, will make a connection between the two, eventually to the point where even if there's no meat present, you hear the bell and you salivate. Humans actually do that with food timing. If you're very used to eating lunch at noon, for instance, even if you just had a very big snack at like 11 o'clock, at noon, your body sometimes is like, hey, wait, I normally eat now. And if you're used to that idea or have seen that in your life before, then you know it's kind of real. So furthermore, the world around us conditions us to what we see. And this isn't something we are usually in control of. If you go somewhere and you see the same thing over and over and over again, your brain's going to associate it. That's just sort of the way things are, and there's not much we do to begin with that. So you get used to certain things. For example, it seems very out of place when there are certain kinds of technology in the middle of a park, because we're not used to that. You don't normally put a computer in a park, so your brain is like, well, that's weird, because you're used to seeing a computer inside. Something that simple can make a difference. So a lot of these associations are internalized during childhood, wherever we were, the world we grew up in, the different places we were at, and our actual conscious thought doesn't necessarily overcome conditioning. Now, I'll talk about how to use conscious thought with the conditioning later, but just be aware of that if you're conditioned to something for a long portion of your life or an important part like childhood, it is hard to make an immediate difference in that. Your brain really likes to settle into certain things. So, this is where we end up with implicit bias. Implicit bias is that your brain has made an unconscious association that causes you to have a propensity for or against something, or a propensity to relate to concepts. And when you see things that are not what you were used to or what you always grew up with, your brain finds that to be odd. Now, it's not a judgment. You are not making a particular choice about this. You are not choosing to prefer something over something else. It's just something that happens. And honestly, most of the time you're probably incredibly unaware of these things. They just happen and you don't notice them unless you're specifically pointed out or you specifically try to test for it. One of the links that I'm going to provide after this video is to the Harvard Implicit Association test. It's a really interesting test that causes you to respond to two different things and how they might categorize very, very rapidly, and is able to pick up differences, very tiny differences in how fast you move. And typically, if you move faster, your brain associates those concepts. And if you move slower, your brain does not associate those concepts. And I would really advise trying out this test because you'll find out really interesting things about the way your brain works. And again, this is not about you as a person. This is not about a conscious thought you're making, and this is not about a judgment. This is just the stuff that's already embedded in you. And then how you might accidentally, in many cases, put that on the world that's around you. So let me give you some sort of examples of how this kind of thing happens. So one of my favorites is sort of the what cues you into whether a young child is a boy or a girl. We really like to know that kind of information. If you see a child in a stroller, your brain is trying very hard to be like, okay, which one of those two things does that person fit into? And a lot of times, if, for example, you see longer hair, we have, in our society, strongly associated that with girls. I've had some friends who have let their younger boys grow out their hair for a while, and people often start by saying she. Now, it's an easy correction, so it's not a major problem, but it is the first thing that your brain does. Sometimes color also cues us into that kind of thing. We're very used to seeing girls in pinker or maybe brighter types of colors and boys in bluer or other types. And when those two things get mixed up, you could make essentially a mistake in your guess because it's different than you expect. Again, it's not like this is a problem. As an example, not related to humans, I have a very cute, very small Chihuahua, and he is a male dog. He has a shockingly large penis for a male dog. It's kind of hard to miss, but he's so little and adorable that people always want to say she. They say, oh, she's so cute. And it's fine because it's a dog and it doesn't really matter. And I say, oh yeah, but he is a terror because he's a Chihuahua and he likes to eat people's faces. And nobody cares, and we fix it right away. But people still make that association. So I think that's kind of interesting. I definitely gender almost everything around me. Cars, dogs, other animals, pretty much every object I use. Think about it. We just like to do that. So another great example sort of tends to be who gets handed the bill in a restaurant. Now, a great server will put it down right between people and let them figure it out. But many times, we are just sort of told because society has shown us this. So when I was growing up, my dad always got handed the bill. Therefore, people are used to handing it to the guy. That's not always the person who's paying. And I have actually confused servers doing that. And they've been like, wait, what? I'm like, no, I have the credit cards. And that's kind of the way that works. But the point isn't that they're trying to do something, and I never assume it is a fault, just that that's not what people are used to. Now, that's gotten a lot better. You might not see that as much if you are, for example, younger, or at least I would hope so. On our campus, I was like how do you know who's a student versus an employee? When you think college student, people often think young, but an MVCC student is often not young, but a returning adult of some type. And so there's a lot of mix-up that tends to go on this campus where people see somebody of a particular age and think they either work here or they are a student, and it's actually the reverse. We have a lot of newer, younger hires who can sometimes get picked up as students, and we also have people who are coming back to be students who might get picked up as employees. And again, I don't think anyone is trying to harm anybody doing this, but if you've ever been in a situation where this happens to you, you might be familiar with it. Examples can get even more important to people's lives. There's actual data related to who ends up in prison versus on parole, and you could take this apart in a lot of different ways. But both Black and Hispanic men are, by a significant proportion, more likely to be sent to prison than to be put on parole compared to white men. Now, could that be related to all of the other things that are happening? Yes, but the data so far suggests that irrelevant of the specific crimes and the specific items and the specific locations, this association still holds. And so that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. Another example of this implicit bias comes from orchestras. So orchestras you wouldn't normally think of as being gendered, but they do have this tendency to come with expectations within the music industry. And in fact, in 1970, of the top 5 national orchestras in this country, only 6% of the players were female, mostly men. Within a time frame, they introduced a new process where they use screens to conceal the identity, and in particular the gender of the musician, from the jury, the people who were deciding based on the playing whether they would be part of the orchestra. And after implementing this within 10 to 15 years, so in 1993, the orchestras had jumped to 21% female. And there was a lot of data that there wasn't necessarily a different number of people auditioning, but there were a different number of people who were being asked to join if it was based on just their playing and not something else about how they looked. I mean, we know this kind of thing is important because, as I've got on this slide, The Voice very specifically created a game show where you couldn't see the person who was singing and you had to make a decision based solely on how they sounded. And quite a number of times, people turned around on that show and said, whoa, that's not what I was expecting. Not that it's a problem, but it's good to know that that's an important thing that happens. So what can you do? The biggest thing that people notice with implicit bias is that if you slow down, it's less likely to be a problem. It's when people jump to something and don't take an extra moment to think about it that it happens, because these are unconscious, unaware. You have no idea what you're doing. As you start to become aware of this, you can notice which implicit associations and stereotypes your brain does jump to at various points. I certainly notice it. I'm now steeped in this kind of stuff. I do work on this, and I can say when I look at somebody, oh, I see my brain judging that situation, or like making an association or saying, I see what you look like and I think you might be this. And then I have to stop and go, okay, now hold on. Do I think that because of logical context clues, like the person wearing an anime on their t-shirt, or am I thinking it because when I see someone in glasses, my brain says nerdy? And, I say that being a glasses wearing nerd, so this is not unknown to me. But I do try to now take an extra second and go, what are the other clues that I have? And or do I not have enough information, and therefore I should ask more questions. I'm never wrong when I ask more basic questions. And then furthermore, if you start to notice this as a bigger issue, I always say that it's worth speaking up, saying that you notice that in a group, every time certain women speak, people don't necessarily agree with what they say, and then the same thing gets said later, and it was skipped. Worth saying, hey, I think I heard that person say that. Hey, I think I saw whatever was going on here, and hey, could we, as a group, accidentally be biasing one way or another? The more people do that, the more we discuss it, and the more we accept that, again, everybody does it, and I shouldn't feel bad about my particular version. I take some responsibility, everybody else does, and we all do a little bit better. And I think that's the key to making a lot of this work. This is not going to happen fast. As we have discussed in this class, change is hard. Your brain doesn't like to change, it likes to do what it wants to do, and yelling at it to be like, wait, just 1 second, is a big part of learning, education, and everything we do in college. And it's going to take time. Just like learning something new, trying to change associations within your brain or teach your brain to notice things it doesn't notice takes time, but all of it is worthwhile because then we do a better job of interacting with everybody who's around us, and that, I think, always makes for sort of a better world. So I hope you learned something a little bit new and different about how our brains work and how we categorize. And I hope you give the implicit association test a try. And I hope you had a great class with me. And this is probably your last assignment. Have a great either rest of your year, rest of your semester, rest of your college time. And I hope to see you around.